I want to talk now about problems with modifiers because it's very easy to confuse adjectives and adverbs or use a double negative or even add in an extra here or there where it's not necessary. So let's take a look at the following example and see if we can find the 5 mistakes that this writer made with modifiers. My grandmother tells urban myths real well. Most people can't hardly tell if they're true or not. She said that once a koala in a zoo felt badly after eating too many oily eucalyptus leaves. This here koala was so full of oil that its fur caught fire when he sat on a heater. You won't find no proof of this story, though. Let's look at our mistakes one by one. In our first sentence, it should say my grandmother tells urban myths really well. The reason for that is that well is an adverb. Adverbs are modified by other adverbs, so we need to use the adverb form of the word real, which is really. In our second sentence, we should say most people can hardly tell if they're true or not. This gets us away from the use of a double negative, which is something we'll talk about further into the lesson. Then we get to our third sentence. You don't want to say felt badly because that's using an adverb to modify a linking verb, and that's not what we want to do. We want to use the adjective because we're not talking about modifying the verb felt, we're talking about how the koala was. So we're using a linking verb and we need to use the adjective form of that. Sentence 4, this koala, that's using a demonstrative pronoun with the word here or there, and we don't want to do that. It makes our writing and our speaking sound like we don't know what we're talking about or like we're not educated. And that's really not how we want people to think of us. So let's look at our fifth sentence. Again, we want to get away from using double negatives, so you should change this to say you won't find any proof of this story, though. We'll talk about that when we get to the double negative portion of the lesson. So first let's start off by talking about how do you even decide what are adjectives and what are adverbs, because they can be very easily confused. A lot of people think that any word that ends in ly is an adverb, but there actually are some, such as lonely and lowly, that function as adjectives. So let's look at the example sentence that I have here. The lonely scientist turned a lowly insect into a radioactive terror. Now, if you look at the words that are modified by those other words, you'll see that scientist and insect are both nouns. Nouns are modified by adjectives, so that means that lonely and lowly are adjectives, even though they end in ly, which is a common ending for adverbs. So it's easy to see why people get confused about this. Then we have the problem, some words have both adjective and adverb forms. So how do you figure out which one to use? You go back to the words that are modified. If the words that are modified are nouns or pronouns, use the adjective. If the words that are being modified are verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs, then you're going to use the adverb form. Look at the example sentence. I think it'll start to help you understand. Some stories about real people are really strange. So we have the word people being modified. People is a noun, so that means we're going to use the adjective form of real, which is real. Then we look at our other word that's being modified, strange. Strange is an adjective. Adjectives are modified by adverbs, so in this case we would use the adjective form of the word, which is really. Then you have words that can function as either adjectives or adverbs depending on how they're used. Let's take a look at my example sentences. A weird tale may appear in the daily newspaper. In this sentence, daily is modifying the noun newspaper, so it's being used as an adjective. But in the next sentence, I read the newspaper daily, this is modifying the word read, which is a verb. So we're using the adverb form in this sentence. So you have to just know which word's being modified and what kind of word is that. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Once you understand that, it's easy to tell if another word that's modifying is being used as an adjective or an adverb. So let's look at some modifiers that cause problems. One of the things that causes a lot of people problems are the words good and well. Now, good is an adjective. Look at the example. A good urban myth has some truth to it. It's going to answer the question, what kind of myth? A good myth. If it answers the question, what kind, it's an adjective. Let's look at another one. The koala feels good today. Now, this is using a linking verb, feels, and it's reflecting back onto the word koala, the koala feels happy. So those are adjectives. Now when you get to the word well, it can be an adjective or an adverb. So let's look at some examples. Animals eat well in the zoo. They eat how? They eat well. This is modifying the verb eat, so it is an adverb. The animal looks well today. Looks is a linking verb, so well coming after it is going to modify animal, and it's an adjective. It's just important to figure out what word's being modified. Here's another couple of words that give people trouble. Bad and badly. Now bad is an adjective, so it's going to be modifying nouns or pronouns. So let's take a look at the examples. A bad myth is too phony to be true. What kind of myth? A bad myth. So now we know that bad is modifying the word myth. Myth is a noun, so bad is an adjective. Look at the second example. The koala felt bad after eating. Here we have that linking verb, felt. So bad isn't modifying felt, it's modifying koala. So we're talking about the koala feeling sick or unhappy, and that is an adjective. The word badly is an adverb. It cannot ever function as an adjective. So here we have, he tells stories badly. Tell stories how? Badly. So now we know that badly is modifying the verb tell. Adverbs modify verbs. Always remember that. Now here's something to watch out for. You never want to write he feels badly or she looks badly when you're referring to someone's state of mind or their health. Because what you're saying is that the person feels poorly, which means he touches things poorly, or he looks poorly, which means he can't see very well, so he sees things poorly. And if those are not what you're trying to say, you want to make sure that you use the adjective rather than the adverb. Now let's talk about double negatives. Now, you guys have heard me correct many students who use double negatives in class, and there's a reason that I want you to understand how to use it correctly. So I'm going to show you the wrong way, and I'm going to show you the right way. Now, in school and business writing, you really want to avoid the use of double negatives. Double negatives mean there's two negative words in a single clause. Let me show you the example. I can't hardly believe that people flushed pet alligators into the sewers. Now, we probably haven't used that word in that exact sentence, but I've heard a lot of people, and this is the way we talk in this area, so it's understandable that people would speak this way, but it's also really important that you learn the correct way. Can't hardly. We have the word not and we have the word hardly in the same clause, which makes it a double negative. So how can we fix it? There's a couple of different ways. For example, you could say, I can hardly believe that people flushed pet alligators into the sewers, or I can't believe. Now we still have one negative in each one of those sentences, but that's fine. As long as we don't put two negatives in one sentence, we're going to be okay. Now, let me show you another one. You won't find no proof for this story. Now, this is something that would be very common for people in our area to say because that's the way we talk. But it is important, like I said, to understand how to speak and write correctly. So here's what you would say. You won't find any proof for this story, and I know you guys have heard me correct many students who say no with substituting the word any. This is what I'm talking about. It's a double negative, and you don't want to speak that way. It makes you sound like you don't really know how to speak correctly. So you could say you won't find any proof for this story, or you will find no proof for this story. So those are easy ways to fix problems with double negatives. Now, when you see the words hardly, barely, and scarcely, you might be looking at a double negative because those show up in double negatives all the time. So when you're going to use one of those words, make sure that you don't have any other negative words in the same clause, like can't hardly, can't barely. You want to be very careful to avoid those things. Now let's talk about the demonstrative pronouns, this, that, these, those. Words we all use constantly. You can use these words as adjectives, but there's three important rules you need to remember when you're going to use these particular types of words, demonstrative pronouns, as adjectives. Here's our rule number one. They must agree in number with the words they modify. All this means is if it's modifying a plural, it has to be plural. If it's modifying a singular, it has to be singular. Look at the examples. These kinds of myths stem from half-truths. Now we are looking at the word myths. That's the kind of word that we're modifying. It's plural, so we need to use these. So we need to be careful with that. This kind. Kind is singular, so we're going to use a singular demonstrative pronoun, this. It's very simple. Just sometimes even if you just say it out loud, you'll know immediately if you're right or wrong. So let's look at rule number 2. Never use here or there with demonstrative adjectives. The adjective already points out which one. It does not need any help. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the non-standard version. This here sewer worker saw an alligator. Just take out the word here. This sewer worker saw an alligator. We already know which sewer worker we're talking about because we're using the demonstrative adjective, this. So we're pointing out the one we mean. We don't have to say it twice. Now let's move on to rule number 3. You never use the pronoun them as an adjective in place of these or those. The non-standard sentence would be, them people have written a book about urban myths. Now, there's 2 different ways you can fix this. You can say these people have written a book about urban myths, or you could say those people have written a book about urban myths. Either one of those is correct, but them people is not correct. Now, when you understand how to properly use modifiers, your writing is going to be so much clearer and so much more enjoyable to read. So I hope that this lesson has helped you figure out